It was 2001, and I had an emergency cesarean section with my third daughter. She was born prematurely, and then I contracted necrotizing fasciitis, more commonly known as the flesh-eating disease, and lost my womb, ovaries, and about 2/3 of the flesh on my torso. And also, as a result of the level of toxins in my blood, I also then contracted septicemia, which that then was damaging to my feet. And necrotizing fasciitis is a horrendous disease that it literally means death of the tissue, is more commonly known as the flesh-eating disease. And the surgeons have no choice but to literally remove the flesh. Apparently you can actually see it spread. It's because the flesh goes black, and so they have to just remove the diseased tissue and hope that they've got it all, which is what they did in an attempt to try and save my life. And then they put me into a medical coma for 10 days. And it was somewhere in that 10 days where I had my near-death experience. And it was just, the very first thing was, I was aware of myself and I wasn't in my body. And the thing that I remember so vividly about it was, I remember thinking, oh, I'm not my body. I thought I was my body. But it was the same sense of myself that I've always been aware of, whether I was sort of 5, 10, 15, that, do you know what I mean? That kind of unchanging sense of yourself that always feels the same, doesn't it? It doesn't matter how old you get. You're like, oh, there's that same. So it was that sense of self. And I remember thinking, well, I'm not in the body with it. And so that was the first thought, was, wow, I'm not my body. And then I was just floating into the most amazing, like just surrounded by light and like this forward momentum. It felt like, just like an elevator almost, just being taken and propelled into this glorious light, and just such profound peace and bliss that words will never do it justice. This beautiful, beautiful, peaceful, blissful place. And I so wanted to go. It felt so nice. And then all of a sudden there was a tug on my arm, and I looked back and it was my husband. And so I tried to pull him because I really wanted to go and I really wanted him to come with me. And he wouldn't budge. And then I could see forms taking shape ahead of me. And I just heard telepathically, if you come, you must come on your own. And I really wanted to go and I really wanted him to come with me. So I tried to pull him again, but he wouldn't budge. And then I heard the same thing. If you come, you must come on your own. And I didn't want to leave him. And then in that decision, the momentum subsided and then obviously came back into my body.
And how did you feel about that decision once you came back? So, because obviously you had that blink of an eye, right? And you were in this blissful state.
Mm-hmm.
It felt so peaceful. What did you think of it once you came back? And I can imagine the pain also came rushing back.
Yeah. So for me, like when I first woke up, because so I was, like I said, I was medically sedated for 10 days. And then when they first brought me round, I had a lot of mental confusion initially, which I think is in some ways like protection too. I mean, obviously there was a lot of medicines and stuff, drugs, but I just remember like I couldn't. I just thought, I can't handle this. I can't. I remember that I had a full tracheostomy and everything, so I couldn't speak or anything, right? But they gave me morphine. And they'd sort of, if I looked like I was in pain, they'd give me a bit more morphine, and they'd say, oh, just like, if you want more, let us know. I used to do this thing with my hand, like, give me a bit more, give me a bit more. And I remember sometimes where I just like, give me a bit more, give me a bit more. And the physical pain would have gone, but it was like the emotional pain. I would just want to go into oblivion, which I did. But then, of course, you have to keep waking up. And each time, was the same, just being faced, like, how on earth do I ever come to live with this? And I couldn't imagine ever being happy again. So it was sort of that near-death experience was such a vivid experience, but I was definitely, 2 feet into the pain of the suffering of what happened, and, a mutilated body that I thought was just, awful. And I remember actually the first time I ever saw it, because it was all dressed and everything, and the surgeons used to the nurses would come. In fact, initially they used to take me to surgery and sedate me in order to change all the dressings. And then they began to sort of do things in the bed. But I remember I couldn't move at all, and they would roll me to change the sheets because obviously, you're weeping and bleeding and whatever else is going on, and then I remember they started to change the dressings. They started to graft skin. They took skin from my thighs and grafted it onto where they'd removed the flesh. And then they'd start to change the dressings in the bed. And one day I remember thinking, I really need to look. I really need to see. And I sort of peeked down and, oh my God, just like this red, angry, awful looking thing. And I couldn't stop crying. And I remember my surgeon came in and he said, what's going on? And I said, it's awful. And he really surprised me because I thought he would say, no, it's not too bad. But he was great because he was so honest. He said, it's the worst thing you'll ever see. I was a bit like, yeah, it is. Yeah, so his honesty actually was so needed. He said, it's the worst thing you'll ever see. And hope is an interesting thing, isn't it? Because I think hope is the thing that gets us through. And sometimes if we hope for something, even if that doesn't quite come as the outcome, it's the hope that we needed to give us enough momentum to be able to get over, this challenging piece and this challenging piece. And what he said was, it's the worst thing you'll ever see, but we'll do all this fantastic reconstructive surgery and you'll end up with a smiley scar. When in my mind created this very neat smiley scar. And then I remember then holding that for a while. That was okay, it's going to look a lot better. It's going to look a lot better. And then that surgeon actually moved away, and I had another surgeon when it came to the reconstructive surgery. And because I actually had they took a piece of my leg. I lost such a level of muscle and flesh on my stomach that I have a piece of pigskin there to seal the bowel and keep it where it should be. And then it's so clever what they can do, isn't it? They took a piece of my thigh, they keep it attached and then sort of flapped it up over my stomach. So I have a piece of my leg is on my stomach. And then the first reconstructive stuff they did was to actually they put these balloons under the good skin on my thigh, and they expanded it every week. And then they took off the grafted skin and then would join up the good skin, which is where you end up with a line scar, right? And it was very successful. And then we started to look at the torso. And my surgeon at the time, he said, I really don't want to do it. He said, because what they do there is they put balloons in the back, right? And then bring the flesh around is the idea. But he said, your bowel is so close. I'm really concerned that when I remove the graft, which is what they obviously have to do, that you're gonna end up with bowel problems. And oh my God, I remember being so devastated. I remember it's this shock, isn't it? Sometimes I couldn't breathe and I couldn't think. And this thing that I'd held on to, it's like someone had just smashed it. And sorry. Not spoken about it in depth like this for such a long time, but it's so hard, isn't it, when you're in pain? But you can get through. For anybody that's listening, you can get through, and it gets easier and easier. Because I never used to be able to talk about it at all. It's very hard. So now it's, but it's so interesting to revisit it. Anyway, I remember that I got home and somehow, I managed to get home because I'd driven myself to the hospital. I managed to get home and rang my sister. And I said, help me. I couldn't speak. And I don't know how, but she said the right things, because sometimes aren't we blessed with the people that are in our lives that somehow just say the right things? And she said, oh, you'll be okay. She said, I just know, you'll be okay. And then that became another layer of acceptance. And I think that's also true in this journey, isn't it? When we're in pain and suffering, it's the acceptance of what is actually allows us to transcend and move beyond it. And so I began to start to sort of come to terms with, okay, this is what I'm left with. And the thing is now is I love my body so much. For anybody who's struggling with any disfigurement or like not loving your physical body, like hating you. Like I hated my physical body, and I didn't realize that that's how I felt about it. But even before I was disfigured, whether my thighs were too fat, or I was always trying to lose weight or do this thing, and just no appreciation, actually for the immense, incredible beauty of the body. And so I think now I see it very differently. I see, because I actually think about all the inner workings, and all the things that go on that mean that we breathe and we're in homeostasis. I mean, it's just remarkable, isn't it? And I think all the ways that my body has recovered and healed is just phenomenal, actually. So what the body can do is quite incredible. And then also what's been interesting to explore is the limits of the mind, where we'll limit ourselves into like, oh, well, I can't do that. And actually, sometimes that's not true. So I've always been quite an optimistic person. So I did tend to focus more on what I could do instead of what I couldn't do. But I remember for the longest time thinking I couldn't run. Where I had septicemia, I lost a bunch of toe tips, and I had there was like big blisters under my foot, so I lost a lot of instep tendon, so very flat-footed, and they had to pin and straighten some of my toes. And so I don't have like tippy toes or things like that. And I remember thinking, no, I can't run. And then it was during lockdown. I had two of my three daughters were staying, and they got into fitness, and I sort of went out and I started walking, and then I thought, oh, I wonder if I could run, and I started to run, and then I can run. So I need the right shoes, but that has always amazed me of where we limit possibility. So yes, so it was a very long answer to your. I didn't realize all that was going to come out. It was okay.
Absolutely, and a very good answer. I just didn't want to stop you. And I think, you touched upon a subject that's so near and dear to my heart, which is how we feel about our bodies.
Mm,
And I think it's such a societal, maybe, norm that and I think especially with women, I think it happens in men, but I see it definitely more prominently in women, that we tend to always look for those things that aren't perfect, those things that aren't like the rest. And we tend to focus on that so much, like my ears are like this, or my cellulite. Um, and I wanted to ask, I mean, you've had a very, um, difficult experience to say the least. And thinking of all the pain, the recovery, the surgeries you've went through, that's definitely a very challenging process to go through. But somewhere there must have also been the mindset of, how am I going to look like? Which is almost like that very superficial voice, like, am I still going to be pretty?
mm,
And I would love if you could speak a bit more about that self acceptance. So, how you were seeing your body before that, and how this experience has changed your image. And you said now that you love your body, the way it looks, and with all those little things. And I can absolutely understand why, because I think it's the story of you, right? It is the story of your body. And that's how I look at my body as well. And every little nook and cranny is just like, it's something that tells a story. And I think that's just part of my history, my evolution.
mm.
Tell me a bit more about your relationship with your body.
Yeah. Thank you. Such a lovely question. One of the things that actually popped into my mind was I remember when I was in hospital. I was in hospital for 3 months in total, and I remember like coming to a point of because initially I was quite groggy. I was in intensive care for 6 weeks. Then I moved on to the plastic surgery ward for 6 weeks. So probably about like eight-ish, 8 to 10 weeks. I remember then of like being in the hospital, a bit more sort of normality starting to come into the mind. And I remember having this one day of like really struggling with like, I am never ever going to be okay with this. I was like, and oh my God, I was like really angry though. I was so angry, like, why me? And like, why is this happening to me? It's not fair. I was really in that kind of energy. And the lovely nurses were so nice, and they kept coming in trying to be nice. And I just wanted them all to go away, not in the nicest, with an expletive. And they're brilliant, and they obviously know so much about this kind of thing. And they said, would you like to speak to somebody else who has experienced something similar to you? Not the same, but this woman had had septicemia. And I said, yeah, okay. It was like, I'll try anything. And this amazing lady came in, and she'd had septicemia. She'd lost her fingers, and it gave me such hope, because one, I was like, well, I can cover all of mine up. I don't have to, there's nothing that everybody has to see all the time. But it was also the fact that she was happy. The fact that she was happy gave me hope that I could overcome this, because she had overcome that. And that was so inspiring, I remember. And then with my body, I think that I think the biggest shift, and I think it's the same as well for our sense of who we are, is to move to an internal reference rather than external reference. So when we're, our external reference is, all the models we see and all the things we're programmed with, is what you're supposed to look like, isn't it? Which always makes me chuckle, because that has changed throughout history. I think of like where people want to be really thin, and that was how I was kind of raised. You want to be really thin, and I think, wow, if we're in the Renaissance period, beauty was curvy and more fat, and that was beautiful. So it's just perspective, isn't it? It's perception of what we're seeing. But so I think when we reference ourselves from the outside in comparison to others, of what this form looks like, versus experiencing ourselves from within, and actually the twofold there, really, the wonder actually of the physical body, but also the whole awakening to spirit, the fact that we are more, like where I had that moment of, I'm not the body, like much of the time for me, I live from that space now, and that just sees this as miraculous, as all bodies are miraculous, and all differences are beautiful. um yeah. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
And it reminded me of one of my favorite stories, which is the most beautiful person that I've seen in my entire life is probably a 50-something-year-old man in Thailand who also had lost all of his teeth. Um,
Mhm.
but I met him during one of my travels, and it's always weird when people ask, like, what is beauty? Because my reference is him, and
Mm.
he's by no means an attractive David Beckham kind of guy. Um, but I met him in this north of Thailand, not really touristy area, and the way he smiled, showing like his whole mouth, like not having a care in the world that he didn't have teeth. He was just so beautiful, but I think he was beautiful because it's who he was. It was his essence shining through. It wasn't a certain standard of beauty or a certain hair or eye color or body type. And that's when I realized, it's so, so personal because when I saw him, he immediately made me feel very welcome, very warm. His English wasn't great, but I just didn't care about it at the
Mhm.
time. And to me, whenever I talk about beauty, I reference that, and it has helped me as well in my own journey with accepting myself and seeing my body as not something that's, a rough template that you can change and just give suggestions based on, but as something that is in its own way nothing short of amazing. For
Mm.
every breath you take, every blink that you're able to do, the things you're able to hear, the fact that you're able to walk, all of those things that we only seem to cherish when we've lost certain abilities. um, and I think it's just, I do my best to always be mindful, even though there's probably things that I would still want to change. But I do my best to be mindful every day of how amazing is it that I can, just drink my coffee with my hand. How amazing is it that I can walk myself to the gym and run on the treadmill? Because not everybody gets to do that.
Mhm.
And it doesn't come from a place of punishment that I have to do it because maybe I had a big dinner last night, but it comes from a place of love and awe for what my body can do. And it's exactly how I think about everybody else's body as well, that it's not up to me to judge whether those bodies are beautiful or ugly, but they're nothing short of miraculous, and I could not understand the first things about their inner workings.
Yeah, that's so beautiful.
So
It is
coming.
miraculous, isn't it? That when we see it, I see it as like it's our vehicle for our spirit to be here. um, and and then and then actually what it love and care for things. I think there's so many wonderful experiments and science catching up with spirit, isn't there, these days? And like all the beautiful experiments with the water, have you seen those? The what's he called? Can't remember his name now, the chap that does all the water experiments, but where the words that are said to the water, it'll form in different ways. And of course we're 70% water, so how we speak to ourselves is so important, and it really changes then our experience. So yeah, really lovely. But gratitude is such a wonderful thing, isn't it? To have gratitude is it can be incredibly powerful for helping us come out of our pain and suffering.
Exactly. Gratitude for what is and not wanting it to be anything else. And that's probably in my 34 years of life, one of the most difficult skills that I've had to acquire. And I would still say I'm not at 100%, but it's a work in progress every day.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious because you've had this profound experience. It's changed, your relationship to your spirit, to your spirituality, probably to yourself, to how you view yourself. What was Wendy like before this experience, and how has it changed you?
Mm. Um, so I think I was very much like, we're born, we die, we dust, that's it. If I remember thinking that's it, there's nothing else. So quite clearly I was like, oh, that was wrong. um, and this sense that we are infinite beings, just recycling around, having this human experience. So definitely softer, way more compassionate. Used to be very judgmental. So much more compassionate, and um, yeah, and embracing, I suppose, embracing of all of life, actually, the beauty of life, and what fascinates me, is what I am fascinated with, and I have been, ever since then, is our suffering, actually, this suffering that we're in, and not necessarily the physical suffering, but the psychological suffering, where actually my journey has taken me more and more, and like realizing, oh my God, I'm just doing it to myself. It is a self-inflicted thing.
Could you
And
define what you mean by psychological suffering?
yeah, so what I mean is, like, all of the ideas that I'm not worthy, I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, no one loves me, I'm not wanted, all of that, which has us in immense suffering, is all untrue. Because and again, it's a bit like, where are we referencing ourselves from? If we're referencing ourselves in the world of physicality, that is commonly what we experience, and therefore then why we believe those things. But the truth is, in order for us to really find our freedom, if you like, is to reference ourselves with spirit, and that the pain is our separation from that itself. And like, I'm not a religious person, like I never have been. In fact, I would say I'd actually been quite anti-religious, because of seeing it. To me, it just seemed to cause more death, punishment, separation, and wars. And so for me, I didn't really kind of get it in that way. So I'm not religious, but for me, there is the pure energy of unconditional love that is the source of all life, that people would call God, source, the universe, whatever. And or in the different, religions, I do, but I think that all religions, actually, the root is love, pure love, all of them, and then the human comes in and interprets, and then it gets lost and misinterpreted. And I, after I'd had my near-death experience, I sort of started studying all different things. I did, like, Eastern stuff, Tai Chi, Qigong, meditation, stuff like that. But I was also studying psychology. And in psychology, one of the theories is, a near-death experience is just something that the brain does at that point in time. And so I started to think, well, maybe it was, and obviously I was on a cocktail of drugs, and so who knows, and began to question it. And then one day I was doing a Tai Chi retreat, and we ate our lunch in silence. That was the first time I'd sort of had this idea of actually being quiet and silent, which is revolutionary in itself. And then the instructor said, I'll find a tree and we'll just do this energetic exercise. So cool, found a tree. And he said, just put your hands close your eyes, and then, when you're ready, just, allow your hands to just move backwards and forwards. So I began to do this with my eyes closed. And all of a sudden, I lost all sense of my separate self again. I met that same love that I did in my near-death experience. And I knew that it was the source of everything, that everything came from there and everything returned to there. And the words were unconditional love. And so our separation from that, because that is us, is, I think, what is the root cause of our suffering, that we don't know, we've forgotten who we truly are. And the other piece of that was, not long after I'd been out of hospital, I received my first experience of automatic writing, where I had a sentence on repeat in my mind and it would not stop. And I got up and started to write, and I just wrote tons of stuff about, as humans, how we hurt ourselves. But one of the pieces in there was, it said, there is love and fear and everything in between, and you can create from either. And in order to have a different experience, it's important that you choose love, but you're unwittingly choosing fear. And that was really, like, unwitting was really, that's really, really relevant. We don't know we're doing it. We don't mean to do it, but we're in this kind of fear veil, and that when the mind opens to love, it's a completely different experience.
And where does this fear come from? Because if I think of my own experience, it almost seems like I was almost born with it, or it was so ingrained in how everybody worked around me that there was no other way.
Yeah. I think my current understanding is that it is like the physical experience is like under a veil of fear. And so, we come in, and then the experience that we get met with, or we then interpret that, oh, like, this is not safe, or I'm not wanted, I'm not worthy, and then we come into the experience of fear. But we don't have to forget. And I think that's awakening, is us remembering, oh, this is what I am. I'm doing this sort of like, this is the love coming from the light, coming from the all that is, into this, human experience. And we hit this like fear, and then we pick up all the patterning that is already here. And we think, oh, this is how it is, and it isn't. It's fear. There is another experience that we can have when we start to operate from love.
And the easy question would be, how do we do that? But I also want to say, I know that you do a lot of work around silencing our inner critics. So you've done a lot of research, right, about who our inner critic is and how can we work with it. So probably there's no easy answer on how we can silence it, or how can we actually connect more with ourselves. But can you tell me what the first places would be for somebody with maybe a shattered sense of self-esteem, of I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough, I'm not pretty, I'm not smart?
Yeah, so for me, it's like pieces of a puzzle. I call it the awakening puzzle. And that feels like, this last 23 years, that is the journey that I've been on, collecting these. This is a piece of the puzzle. This is a piece of the puzzle. And so it actually is to allow yourself to open up, that there could be a whole nother way of experiencing yourself. And the first piece for me was the emotions that I learned I went to India and did amazing work learning how to process emotions. So to move to see them just as energy, and that you're just flowing with whatever the energy is, the sensation. Because the real problem is emotional, not logical, actually. It's like we're trying to figure it all out in the head, or you could say, like, with the ego mind, but the ego mind is itself the problem. It's not bad or wrong, it's nothing, it's just a protective mechanism. But like Einstein said, you can't solve a problem with the same level of thinking that created it, which is why the psychology and the digging into all of the things never really brings to true freedom, because it's just more of the same. Maybe some slight relief, but the reason it doesn't last is because it's never really getting to the truth or the root or cause. And so it's to surrender the thinking and allow yourself to come into, like, learning to process emotions. That was the first thing I always teach, how to process emotions, so that we can then start to realize more we're energy beings and we're just in perpetual flow. But really we're, part of the block is, we're in denial of sort of 50% of our emotions because we don't want to feel them. And also where we felt them when we were young, they seem huge and insurmountable, like, I'll die if I go there. So unconsciously we're like, don't feel that shame, don't feel that humiliation, don't feel that guilt, And so it's to, I guess, reverse the way of thinking about that to get a new perspective on that. So you become unafraid of any feeling sensations. And if we put them in the ultimates of love and fear, we're afraid of fear, we're avoiding it. Whereas when we realize, there's nothing to be afraid of, it's just a sensation in the body right now. And I'm talking about psychological fear, not if you're physically, if there's a tiger running at you, do what you need to do. That's something happening. But the psychological fear that, will get tense and then all, because whatever energy we're in, the thinking will correspond to it. So if we're in fear energy, the thinking is fear-based thinking, separation, I've got to protect myself, So I sort of see that the ultimate is everything is energy, and we're sort of been caught in fear energy, and the way it functions is pain, suffering, separation, wars, competition. It's just the way it functions. It's not wrong or bad, it's just the way it functions. But the power we have is to choose differently, and when we choose love, it has a different way of functioning. It's, an extension and collaboration and connection and things like that. So that's one piece of the puzzle. And then things like tools like forgiveness, and but to really understand what that truly is, that it is, forgiving, the extension of love. So everything is forgiven, which is where we start to actually release our judgment, because our judgment creates separation. And these are things that within the ego mind, we operate in those as if there's like there's no other way to be. Of course, this is how it is, but it's to allow the mind to open such that a different perspective can come in. Seeing ourselves as energy and knowing, like, I have a body, but I'm not the body. I have a mind, but I'm not the mind. Have feelings, but I'm not the feelings, because again, commonly we're so powerful that what we decide for and believe is what we experience, and what we identify with is what we'll experience. So we're just very identified with the psychological mind. So it's and it's like more of an unlearning and a letting go to become your true self. I call your true self your soul self, than it is becoming anything.
Definitely.
Let's come back to forgiving, and let's look first at the patterns, because that in fact that's another sort of piece of the puzzle is that has me intrigued most at the moment. I'm kind of making lots of notes on these patterns, because I think many of us, we're just running the same pattern. So if we can see the pattern and realize that it is a pattern and a program, it's not who I am. Because I think, again, that commonly we think, this is who I am, and it's like, no, it's just a program. Almost like a computer game, or a computer. If we see, actually, I'm just programmed, but it's not who I am. And who I am truly is free and gets to choose. Like, we're that powerful, we can, recreate ourselves in a different way. Because although things are happening to me, that ultimately I am the one, and even from very, very small, I am the one who is putting the meaning to it. Like, if you really get, we are spirit having a human experience, and we are putting meaning to things all the time. That's our will to create, our power. And so the example that you shared, like, that is probably going to create a perfectionist pattern, isn't it? Where I have to get everything perfect, I have to be the best. And that kind of shows up. It's interesting. There's like, it will show up in like opposite ways. So someone will be a massive high overachiever is one way it will show up, just striving. But there's that, the inner sense of like never being enough is crushing. And then, someone will do the opposite and hide, because if I can't get it perfect, then, I can't. I know I had the perfectionist pattern, and where it would just, I was an overachiever at school. That was how I got my parents' love. I'm good at that, good at cleverness and getting everything right. but it also meant I held back a lot, because if I couldn't get it perfect, I wouldn't do it. And any feedback always felt like crushing criticism. So we don't, if we're running that pattern, we don't allow ourselves to have the growth and the learning. And learning is not a joyous thing. Although we may take something from it that instant, it's like a drug almost, the hit of getting the A or whatever, or the high grade, or being the best. It's very short-lived, because it doesn't bring any real satisfaction. So they're all coping strategies for a sense of I'm not enough. But none of them work. They're all the ego strategy, really. None of them actually work, because you can't solve the idea that I'm not enough with anything from the outside of you, because nothing will ever be enough, which is why people just go on and on, the next thing, as opposed to just realizing, oh, I am enough just because I am. Truly realizing who you are. But seeing those patterns is part of what helps us to go, oh, look at that, that's interesting. Well, that really doesn't work, does it? And then choosing to do it differently, choosing a new behavior. And part of the freedom, I think, is that, which actually ties in nicely with the forgiving piece, is we really have to forgive anyone who we think has done anything to us that has meant that now I'm struggling with this thing. So I come from dysfunctional parenting. And, any blame out there, it will keep us stuck. So when we can forgive, and I always sort of see that, everybody is doing the best that they can with the knowledge and wisdom that they have at the time. Even if they appear to be like, narcissistic behavior, for example, we go, well, that person knows what they're doing. Which is, kind of like the behavior of my dad. It's like, yes, but even so, he was so pained that he couldn't act in any other way, because, like we were saying, if we're operating from fear, pain creates pain. It doesn't mean to, it's just how it functions. And love creates more love, just how it functions. And often if we're in pain, pure love is very, very uncomfortable. So although we may want it, if we believe I'm not worthy of it, which is one of the deepest things, isn't it? I'm not worthy of this beautiful love. And of course, the truth is everyone is.
I think one of the deepest things that I've had to work on myself was when I realized that when people loved me and appreciated me, I could not believe it.
Mm-hmm.
I felt it as fake. I thought the person was genuine in what they were saying and showing, but I thought, why? Why would you do that? And that was to me a signal that I have to do more work. Because
Mm,
unless I see myself as somebody that's worthy of love, as somebody who loves herself, of course, if I don't think I'm worthy, then why would I ever believe anybody else could? So
yeah,
it starts with ourselves, and it also starts, I like to say, with also not being a victim. Because when you are a victim, and it may very well be that you have been a victim in many situations up until now, but when you remove yourself of that role, that's where the power lies in changing your story.
yeah, yeah. Because the truth is, the world works from the inside out, not the outside in.
Exactly.
And so if we perceive ourselves as victims, which again is a fair enough perception from the level that we've been experiencing ourselves, but what we have to realize is there's another level that we can experience ourselves at. And again, a bit like taking an upgrade in a computer game, right? I've been a victim of, versus, oh, hang on a minute, actually, I'm powerful here. I am not a victim of anything, and that I get to choose and decide. And yeah, really, really beautiful. And that whole like allowing love, because I know with my husband, whose hand I didn't die for, like, we actually ended up splitting up because he loves me so much. He always has done. And when I met him, he felt like my soulmate. It's beautiful, beautiful love. But what I didn't realize at the time was that part of me, I couldn't accept that. I couldn't accept that for myself. And so I created this whole story that he didn't like my body. And anyway, we ended up splitting up. but quite beautifully, we had 8 years apart, and then we did come back together, and we're together again now, which is wonderful, and I'm so appreciative of that. But it is interesting. I could see where my whole life I'd been looking for love outside of me, looking for the perfect one, that would make me feel whole and complete, and that, again, we're looking in the wrong place, because the truth is it's inside of us. And when we realize it is us, then we become the overflowing cup of love. Like we're saying, the extension of love. We're no longer in any need. We're not trying to get anything. And then we have such beautiful sharings, with everybody, because it just makes a whole different experience. But it
Absolutely.
is that lovely thing, isn't it? About, you can only love to the capacity that you love yourself. And it's not to say that people can't come and love us, and that can be really nice and helpful, actually, because people can flourish under the love of other people. But the ultimate is, we have to realize that it is us.
Absolutely. So while we're on the topic of self-esteem, I also wanted to ask you about how we build our self-esteem. I think often enough, especially today in the world of social media, we get so many opinions and thoughts, right? Asked for and unasked for.
Mhm.
So what I realized was that a lot of people, will validate you. So you'll get a lot of positive comments, you'll get a lot of positive reinforcement. Oh, you look so good, you're so pretty, that's such a cute dress. And it's very easy to let those comments, especially when they come from friends, boyfriends, partners, people close to you, it's very easy to let that inflate your image of yourself, to the point where if those compliments stop, you're left wondering what happened. Am I still pretty? Because nobody said it today.
Mm-hmm.
What has changed? And I think I was also looking at some statistics, about plastic surgery, and we even see it nowadays. I think on almost every Instagram page, right? So many women with fillers in their lips. And there's nothing wrong with that per se, but there is something wrong if the standard keeps changing and we keep chasing the next thing, whether it's now fillers in the lips and then it's implants and another thing. It's always like chasing the next thing because somehow you don't feel worthy yourself. And
Mm.
I wanted to explore with you, how can we deal with this outside noise, which is very well meaning sometimes.
Such an amazing question. The first thing I want to pull out right from the beginning, when you said, how do we increase our own self-esteem? I want us to think that there's two selves, the little s self and a capital S self. So the little s self is the one who is getting taking our worth from the outside. We could call it the ego too, right? That, 5 people have said that this dress is pretty. Oh, that feels amazing, right? And so it's referencing the outside for, enoughness, validation. It's looking for external validation. The capital S self is the soul, who is essence, like your lovely Thai chap that you mentioned. The essence of him, like no teeth, irrelevant. It filled with the joy of his essence, and that's beaming out, and that's what you see. And we see other people like that in life, don't we? Their essence is so beautiful. The beauty is not a superficial skin-based appearance in any way type of thing. And so that self is internally referenced, and not internally referenced as in the ego mind, because obviously that's kind of feels internal, doesn't it? But almost like, source referenced, God referenced, the universe referenced. Is that the knowingness that, I am love, and the beauty of that, and then those give us like a different perspective. They almost are like different minds to me. Like we were saying before, fear thinks in this way, love thinks in this way. It's just a very different way of functioning. So I think if you truly want freedom, you want to go for your capital S self and unveiling that so that you can live as that, so that you're not referenced from the outside. But then, having said that, the outside is wonderful for helping us see everywhere that we have some kind of limiting idea. So that if all experiences arising within, what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, is we have to take responsibility. This is within me. It's nothing to do with the outside. And so if somebody says a good comment and I feel like, oh, or someone says a negative comment, I feel like, oh, either way, it's happening within me. And then I can just, allow the flow of energy such that then I become less affected by the outside. That feels like the journey really to me, is that small self to capital self, capital S self. We're making this journey to our true self where we become less and less. The outside is then just interesting and almost like a scientist. It doesn't have any emotional energy in it. It just has, oh, that's interesting. That person didn't like this dress. And those 5 people did. And that's actually making me think about the lovely Wayne Dyer, who I absolutely adored as a spiritual teacher. And I remember a story him telling about one day he'd written a new book, and on the same day, this was back in the days of it, being super paper and things through the post, pre-digital era. On the same day, he received one letter, with absolute gratitude and thanks. This is the most amazing book this person had ever read, and they were so grateful to him, and they thought it was fantastic. And he also received a shredded copy of it from someone who was so mad and thought it was the worst thing they'd ever read, to the point that they were so incensed that they wanted to send it and tell it to him. And he said, this is the same words on the page. So it means nothing about him or the words on the page, because everybody is putting everything through their own perceptive, through their own lenses of life. And I think that when we are in our little S self, we take everything personally, and we're obsessed with ourselves actually, and we think it's all about us. And as we're in the capital S self, we realize that's nothing to do with me. It's just, that's what's going on in that person, or that's what's arising in that person.
Exactly. I think one of my biggest revelations was definitely realizing that everybody is so busy with themselves. They do not spend that much time thinking about me. So coming back to, those of us that maybe struggle with different kinds of issues, say hopelessness, grief, depression, what would you say is the best way to deal with that? If you could give any piece of advice, because you've gone through, your own process of coming to terms with what your body looked like, with recovery, with what your new life meant to you. If you could give one piece of advice to somebody feeling hopeless right now, what would you say?
I think it would be that actually, like, learning to process emotions, because I think that, they are the block, and that what I found through, and when I say process, I mean is that you come to the emotion and you see like the rawness of the emotion itself, and you be with the energy of it. And what I found was things would open up, and I would always find peace. The difficulty often is being willing to let go of the story, because it's what we are thinking, that we are thinking is fact. That is often then why we're feeling like we're feeling. And that, but one bit of hope, because obviously that's a journey to go on, right? But one bit of hope would be, there is another way. There is another way to experience yourself, and that way is love, and it heals everything.
Beautiful. Wendy, how can people find you and your work?
So my website is wendy-harrington.com. And I have 2 books. One is called Process and Prosper, and the other one is called From Vegas to the Pearly Gates. They are both available on Amazon. Vegas to the Pearly Gates is my memoir and my story through my illness and the spiritual awakening that followed. And Process and Prosper is a very short book that was designed to help process emotions. And in there, actually, it's a 7-step process when I wrote that, but actually now I teach it as a 4-step process, just because I simplified it. I do a regular masterclass. So that's on like inner champion to inner critic. It is more aimed at people who have a sense of calling and that there's something that they feel like they want to do in the world and they know they're holding themselves back. But I do share on there about, I share the 4-step emotional processing strategy and actually the things that are in the way of us experiencing our true selves. So that's wendy-harrington.com/masterclass. And then also on social media. So I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook,